At the turn of the 20th century, Buffalo, New York businessman George N. Pierce made his mark in the newly industrialized world by creating incredibly luxurious automobiles, catering to wealth and status. This is the remarkable story about automotive innovations leading from a bicycle factory in New York to the White House. This is the story of the Pierce era. By the late 1800s, the American manufacturer's landscape was changing. People were becoming more interested in self-propelled vehicles. George N. Pierce recognized the desire of the public and decided to buy out his partners at Heinz, Pierce and Munschauer in 1872.
At the turn of the 20th century, George Pierce was building bicycles and bird cages, oddly enough, and went on to build motorcycles and ultimately cars that became very, very well respected.
I know it was ahead of its time. It was extremely well-built automobile. And that's what they took their time. You had craftsmen. I mean, it was really old school.
By 1901, he was making a proper gasoline-powered vehicle. And onward, they got larger and larger and more reliable and more expensive and much more prestigious year by year. And eventually, they became among the biggest cars in the world, certainly the biggest regular production car in the United States.
Automobiles at that period, kind of the way motorcycles are now. He's got an automobile, that guy. He's one of the crazy guys. Drives an automobile. Be careful with him, you know. I mean, you were an adventurer. Women look, oh, the guy had an automobile. That was like a huge deal, you know. It was dangerous. It was fast, you know. It was technically interesting, you know. It's not like now you turn the key and get in. To be an automobilist at that period, you had to be a real convert.
Playing on the wild success and critical acclaim, the Pierce era continued upping their already high prices, claiming their cars were symbols of luxury and status, not simply a car.
In 1910, when Pierce was beginning to hit its stride, you could buy one for as little as $3,000 or as much as $7,000. Have to remember, this is an era when doctors didn't even take home an average of $500 a year. This was money enough for a couple of houses, even in Southern California. So we're talking a great deal of money, and to afford one of these things, you had to be an heir to a considerable fortune, or you had to be very successful in whatever realm of endeavor you had.
I'm always fascinated by Pierce Arrow's pricing, because prior to World War II, they were the most expensive cars. I don't know how anybody could even afford these cars. If you look at their advertising, if you look at the direction they were headed, they catered towards the super wealthy. They didn't just cater for the average man by any means because you couldn't afford it.
Whatever it cost, that's what it cost. Whereas the Model T was sort of built down to a price, much like Packard used to say, the Pierce Arrow was built up to a standard.
One of the defining features of Pierce's cars was their unmatched durability, repeatedly proven through long-distance contests like the Glydian Tour, which took its entrance over horribly maintained public roads, which at the turn of the century was the majority of roads.
One of the big things that Pierce Arrow had going for it was reliability and power. And the roads were bad during 1910, 12, 13, the early teens. The good roads movement had yet to gain traction. So things were still bad. There were still horseshoe nails everywhere. There were still ruts in the road. They still turned into quagmires after a rain.
If you wanted to go from point A to point B, from one town to the other, you took a train, you took an interurban, you did something else. You didn't necessarily drive the car, because tires were a real issue and flats were common with the horse-drawn vehicles. So George Pierce found a niche in building like 1904, 1905, 1906, good, torquey, durable cars that you didn't have to shift all the time. You didn't have a high RPM base, but you would just move along and they would proceed. And they Their concept was a good, solid, reliable engineering, and that's what their salability was.
In 1913, the models that distinguished Pierce from every other manufacturer were the six-cylinder models. The 38C, the 48B, and the 66A. One of the largest cars in America up to that time.
Pierce was crazy. It was just more torque. I mean, you can pull up to a foam pole and climb the pole in high gear. They were amazing cars in their time. They weren't the only one with large displacement, but nobody was that big but the Pierce.
And keep in mind, we didn't know how to make horsepower any other way than by increasing the size of the engine. And bigger indeed was better. And bigger meant higher. And bigger meant longer and wider. And literally, you rode above the crowd if you were in a 66A Pierce Arrow.
When you sit in that thing, it's high up, you feel like Captain Nemo in the airship. You're just looking down at people as you go. But you look down on the roofs of cars. You know, I mean, I find Honda Civics crushed up under the wheel well of the thing after driving around. Oh, gee, sorry, excuse me, get that out of there. Yeah.
But the innovations weren't limited to the rugged construction and power under the hood. The engine was mounted on a 119-inch wheelbase chassis and 4- and 5-passenger touring bodies. 1913 was also the year Pierce introduced standard nickel trim and a compressed air starter system.
Some people consider the Pierce not only large in size, the cubic inches of the engine, but also in stature, in prestige. This was a car, it was one of the 3 Ps, Packard, Peerless, and Pierce Arrow, that were the go-to cars if you were a very wealthy person. It meant that you had arrived.
Like most of these automobiles, they are a statement of what you have done financially, how you are successfully, and these are statements that some people really need to make. And a Pierce Arrow makes that statement.
This is a car that really helped you define your status, and not only your place within society up and down, but also your place within high society. To own a Pierce was to indicate that you were an individual of good taste and good judgment and conservative wealth. Probably the ultimate cachet for Pierce was when it became the first cars owned by the White House.
This particular car, a Model 38C 6-passenger Brougham, was one of 750 made in 1913 and one of very few restored to nearly mint condition. It's a shining example of the artistry and restrained elegance that made Pierce Arrows the preferred car of the conservative elite.
You know, I think today we reflect on the Pierce Arrow, and in looking back at that period of history and time, we see the interesting provenance in those cars and the fact that they still exist, that they have survived the rigors of life, being that they're still together and still drivable, usable machines, and that they have such an interesting story to be told about each one of them. If only we knew more of those stories.
The teens was the golden age of Pierce Arrow. That was truly an American equivalent to the Rolls-Royce.
What I appreciate the most about the early teens and about cars like the Pierce Arrow, it's a gigantic, these heroic cars that were so large and so shiny and so brassy, is they did exemplify strength and American ingenuity, and ultimately outdid their European counterpart.
The Pierce Arrow still stands today as one of the pinnacles of American elegance and thoughtful design. These stunning examples of turn-of-the-century craftsmanship set the standard against which all other luxury vehicles are measured. These are the fruits of industriousness and ingenuity, coming together to provide a driving experience like no other.